Hi guys. Okay. Today I got something different to talk about. In the Percussion Revolver series, we're going to talk about one of those iconic guns that everybody's seen, but very few people ever handled one. And that was true in history as well. And that was the Lemat. Now this is actually owned by a close friend of mine who was kind enough to loan it to me for a shooting test and a quick little review. This won't be as in-depth as I normally go, and I'll explain why in a minute, but for those of you that don't know, the Lemat is a 9-shot 44 caliber with a 20 gauge shotgun barrel underneath here, commonly called the grape shot revolver. Let's talk a little bit of history. There was a gentleman who was going around who had designed this, Mr. Lemat. And he had designed it here in America. And just prior to the Civil War, he was going around trying to see if he could get a contract or if he could get some interest in it. And a very common way in those days for you to try to generate some interest was to give away gifts. And so he was finding generals, senior officers, people in charge of some sort of big military bureau and things like that, and giving these guns as gifts in an effort to get his name out there, and see if he could get a little bit of interest going and a possibility of getting a field test and a contract. Well, it didn't happen, and the Civil War happened, and so the first ones were produced in Philadelphia, and then he quickly went over to Europe where he was getting them produced for the Confederacy. And that's the reason this is considered a Confederate revolver. But let's be clear, this was a Confederate revolver basically for officers. His idea was of a cavalry arm. And in theory, he had a distinct idea here because the gun had such firepower. It had 9 shots. Originally, I believe it was a 42 caliber, and it was a 20 gauge shotgun underneath. They had some variations. I understand at one point there was a 16 gauge underneath at one point, or a couple of the models. And they may have made it a smaller diameter than 44 caliber in a few. But the bottom line is the gun was designed so that whenever you cocked it, and this is the Calvary model, there were 3 distinct models, and the one that has this downturn is the Calvary model, and it's got the lanyard here to attach. On the face of the hammer, there's a little stub that when you push down, see it go down? Ooh, this one's tight. Like that. That hits the nipple here to fire the shotgun barrel in the middle. Bam, like that. And it allowed the individual using this to have 9 shots when the average gun revolver was 6, or a single shot, and then have the big shotgun for a shock and awe type thing where I could shoot and it was a get off me now, or firing a load of bird shot or some other shot into a crowd to blind and deafen and just shock them at point blank range. That was a shock weapon. Now, and I'll get to this in a minute, the great weakness is the loading lever on this thing. That's the weakness of this design. The sights are similar to a Colt. They have a notch rear and a pretty good blade, and I will have to give Pieta, or whoever, I believe Pieta manufactured this, I will have to give them credit because the one that I handled back many years ago was an earlier version of this that had been in production as a replica, and the sights were much worse. They were not nearly as good as these sights, and it was very difficult to hit anything because the sights were so bad. These modern replicas are much better with sights, and you can actually make this into a fairly accurate revolver. Underneath the barrel, right here, is a tab, and that tab goes forward. Now you grab the barrel and turn, and it's got some tension to it. And it will unscrew, unlike a Colt or something. And off comes the barrel for easy cleaning. Notice the big old huge ring and the threading up here on the front of the barrel. The cylinder can now easily be retracted. That leaves you with the shotgun barrel attached. You can unscrew long threads the shotgun barrel to make it easy to clean the shotgun barrel. And if you had a load that was a dud and you couldn't get it to go, you could unscrew it and clean out the chamber, run you a pipe cleaner wire up there and clean out the chamber and get it back into operation. Pretty cool. Now when you go and look, and the modern version that everybody keeps talking about is, they go and look at the TV show Westworld in the early seasons, and the man in black has a cartridge conversion of this revolver. Another nice touch, if you'll notice, he put grease, they have grease grooves on the shotgun tube for lubrication of the main barrel. And whenever you, that's right, it's actually beveled. I erred just a second. You see Richard Harris's character. The gun that they're using to fire blanks has been modified because, see, the tube will not come out of the cylinder. And so it is actually screwed in like this. There. And on the one you see in the TV show, the back of the cylinder has been relieved to take blank cartridges and open to take a blank shotgun like that, and it puts together. This would not work. Now they did make a cartridge conversion of this to pin fire and maybe even to something else, but no, not like this. There's nothing holding them together, and so once you'd screw this back together and have it, it would not be a very strong system. So you certainly couldn't put very powerful in it. Its weight and the black powder 44 is about the limit of the design, to be honest with you. But see, that would hold the cylinder in place like that. Now about these fine threads, I would definitely get anti-seize to make sure that the gun doesn't freeze up and make you have some problems. By lining that notch back up and pushing that lever back in, that's how we lock it all together. Now, as I said, this was a officer's gun for the most part. This was a badge of rank, and P.T. Beauregard, Jeb Stuart and all of them, several of them were said to have carried or used one of these in war. I'm pretty sure it wasn't the only gun they had. And let's face it, generals don't fight a lot. Generals are the guys back here on the back telling you where to go fight. It's the lieutenants and the captains and majors leading the assault and things like that. To, you know, they're the intelligence behind, they're the directing. They're not supposed to be in the front ranks. So one, having one of these as a personal revolver, I can absolutely see that. It's a tremendous amount of firepower. Weakness, it takes forever to load this thing. The great weakness of the design is this loading lever. Let me get you up close and show you. It unhooks off this teeny tiny little catch right there, and in the originals this was broken off. Almost all of them you find are broken. It's got the pivot point here, and here's your plunger going down, putting it down. Now look how whenever I've got the ball in it and I put the ball underneath it, there's where the starting position is on that ramrod, fully straight up. So now I got to grab it, and how do you hold it and pry this down because it's so close? See, I mean, that is the ball sitting under it, that is the ball fully seated. Also, by the way, the center rammer comes out to be your shotgun loader. Some people in the originals were supposed to be threaded, and so you went down there at the bottom and you screwed it to keep this from slinging out. If this is fairly loose, it'll just fall right out of the gun. If you point the gun straight down, there's nothing to hold it. There's only a little bitty notch right there that the edge of this is supposed to fit into, just like that and hold it. So that is the great weakness of this design, is the loading lever. Now, if you're interested in getting one of these and using them, I think it'd be a great fun revolver at the range. It's a little big and awkward for a field gun, but it could be done. But as you see on some of the originals, this loading lever has been taken off. They just take the thing off, and the gun will be loaded with a ramrod, where you would put the powder or the paper cartridges in there, and then you would take like a wooden block and tap it down, and then use like a ramrod just out here in the air, tap, 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 to force it, or take the cylinder off and load it. Many of the people that get these today to take to the range simply get a reloading tool so they can sit this cylinder on a device and use the rammer to load it off of the gun, and that would be a distinct advantage. Honestly, it would. Other than that, it's a fairly good action. Decent trigger, positive lockup, and fires reliably. The Lemat is just one of those guns. Now, numbers. They estimate about 2,900 of all models, total production. And there was a Calvary, an Army, and I want to say even a Navy version. And that the difference basically is the trigger and a slight difference to the grip. But that's it. It's a cosmetic basically. The basic action does work. Now, as I said, later on these would go on in Europe to become a pinfire revolver. And if this was a cartridge firearm, yeah, because the weakness is that loading lever. If I could simply pop it in somehow without having to use this loading lever, this would be much more viable of a firearm to me. But because of that, that's what relegates this to me as a range gun, an enjoyment gun. Now, we're kind of all jaded to the Colts and the Remingtons. That's the vast majority of the Army, of the cap and ball revolver world. But in reality, there were other designs. There was, of course, the Whitney. There was the Rogers and Spencer that didn't see combat that we can prove and were put into storage, but they were created. There was the Savage, which is a round, funky-looking gun. There was the Star. There was the Lemat. There were quite a few cap and ball revolvers running around during the war that were not just Colt and Remington. And so there was a big variety floating around. The problem with it was is so many of these designers were trying to compete with each other and not step on Colt or Remington's patents. And so you can see why he come up with a different loading lever system. Had this loaded this way somehow, like a Colt, through a rammer going straight down into this lug underneath the barrel, it might have been more viable. If it had somehow connected and did this way, like a Colt would, it might have been more viable. But he may have been violating a patent with that loading lever, and so he had to come up with this way. It's a fun gun to shoot. And in a minute I'm going to show you some shooting where a friend of mine has gone with me to the range because he's a Civil War reenactor and has just been chomping at the bit for the opportunity to fire a Lemat. So we went out there to let him shoot it. So in fact, let me go cut that footage now and we'll come back. Did it turn red? We are recording. You're hot. All right.
One more. Hey, one more.
Oh, one skipped. I'll grab another cap. Let her fly. That's it. Well, what do you think of it?
Mighty fine.
Let's see what you hit. Okay guys, today for the range time with the Lemat, I'm not going to be doing the shooting. My friend Fox Brunson here will be doing the shooting. Now, Fox is a Civil War reenactor, and today he's dressed up in Confederate garb, because when you go to these Civil War reenactment things, quite often you got to have both uniforms, because there ain't enough one side, you got to dress for the other side too. So today you're doing the Confederate, because it's a Confederate Lemat revolver.
That's right.
Excellent. Now, what do you think of the Lemat?
Well, I've always thought that it was a real showboaty piece, but a showboaty piece that I've always wanted to shoot real bad.
It's got the cool factor now.
And so I was really excited to come out here today and to give it a whirl. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and maybe we can do it again soon.
We will. Now, in full disclosure, guys, this is actually a loaner gun from a friend of mine who got it and wanted me to work up loads. This, as you know, there's a shotgun barrel involved in it, but we will not be shooting the shotgun barrel, because this one has a problem when you, even though we've tightened the screw and everything, when you pull the trigger, only 1 out of 10 tries. We tried it on just a cap, unloaded barrel. The hammer nose folds up rather than firing, and so I need to do a little bit of work on the gun to get it to fire the shotgun reliably, because I'm not going to load all that shotgun, excuse the noise, but we are at the range, and make it more reliable. But how did you like the fact it took so long to load this thing?
That was unreal. Just absolutely mind-boggling how long it took.
The great weakness of this gun is the loading lever, and we loaded one with the loading lever, and it just, you're just scared it's going to break.
It was an absolute holy terror.
Yeah, you're sitting there trying to pull it, and you're just scared that thing's going to shear off. It just load the cylinder off the gun. That's what we ended up doing for the other 8 rounds. And I'm using a load of about 25, around 25 grains, a wax homemade Wonder Wad, and then a 454 ball that cut a small ring of lead. And it grouped really well. Now let me move the camera up. I want you to see the group. He was, as you saw, he was about 7 to 8 yards away. And there is his group right there.
Everything from here
up. That hole's already in target, but he put one there. Well, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And I believe that was his first shot, because you're getting used to the sights.
I think so.
But the rest of them were vertically right in here. I feel with a little bit of load development, I think it wants a little bit more power. I think if I went up closer to 30 rounds and maybe changed the wad, that I would be able to get it. Maybe use a 451 instead of a 454. Would be able to group it. But that is a relatively round group, and that's the thing I always look for in shooting. If it's just a vertical string, that's telling me there's something inconsistent. But if you can easily make a circle out of it, and most of them are kind of in a hand span, then it's something that you can work with. If they're just all over the target, don't even waste your time. But I think that with a little load work would do better. As a reenactor, you can see why this was an officer's gun.
Definitely.
Takes forever to load. Would not be something would you want to go back and fight at Gettysburg with that gun?
No, I don't believe I would.
As an officer who rarely ever shoots, yeah, it would be very nice. But in reality, it's just too weak of a loader. Yes, it has high firepower, but it takes forever to reload that thing.
It does have the cool 9 rounds in the cylinder, revolving around a shotgun barrel. I mean, guys, who doesn't like that? Come on.
It's got the firepower, but once she runs empty, you better have a fast horse.
Better have a fast horse. I mean, you can beat somebody to death with it.
Yeah.
Quite easily. That's 2.5 pounds, 3 pounds of steel that you just wreak havoc with.
Well, in the modern TV show of Westworld, one of the lead bad guys has a modified Lemat-like gun.
Cartridge conversion. Thank you, Ed Harris.
Yes, it's something that wouldn't work in real life. It looks good in the show and it's shooting blanks, and I know that, but in real life that wouldn't work.
Now they actually do. They actually did.
Cartridge conversion.
Well, they made a purpose built
Mhm.
cartridge Lemat and a cartridge Lemat carbine.
Yes. And high
Very
firepower,
rare.
I could see the high firepower in a cavalry.
Yeah.
Because you're going to sweep through and you're predominantly using your saber. And so the pistol is a U, and then it's click, shotgun, get off me, you
Yeah.
know, or the disperse or whatever, but the predominant use in the cavalry was the saber anyway. For most,
Yeah.
slashing through, running through at speed.
Now, Federal cavalry,
Yeah.
yes. Yes,
Yeah.
they use the saber a lot, but, you know, Confederate cavalry,
They just lined up with pistols, we know that.
they if they could find a pistol, they would certainly go with that. But now there were entire Confederate cavalry units, including the 53rd Alabama
Mhm.
Partisan Rangers.
Mhm.
They exclusively carried three-banders.
Mhm.
Three-bander rifled muskets is what they carried on horseback.
Mhm.
But
I remember reading about it was 4 or 5 Confederates that surrendered at the end of the war. And when they were told at sundown about it, and that the next morning they could come into town and surrender, and they rode in the next morning, not knowing what to expect, and they were kind of welcomed with open arms. At the front door of the church is where they held it, and the officer that was recording it to take their oath of allegiance so they could go home, he recorded that the 4 men had 18 pistols for 4 men. You know, 18 pistols on 4 men. He said that they were all over them and all over the horse.
yeah,
And that they surrendered 1 gun each so they could say that they surrendered a gun. And they signed off and they packed up everything and they left. But you're right, the Confederate cavalry, they were big on the guns. But I know about the history of where this gun comes from and the fact that the general's liking it. And as a general showy, yeah, that's got the cool factor all limited out.
yeah. Mr. Lemat was actually a good friend of PGT Beauregard.
Mm-hmm.
And so naturally, whenever he was first gearing up for production of this thing, you know, he'd hand them out as gifts
Mhm.
to higher ranking officials, including Beauregard.
Mhm.
Stewart carried one. They made their round, sort of, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not 100% certain on the production number of the Lemat,
Mhm.
but it was almost exclusively an officer gun.
Yeah. And you can see that when you get out here and you try to load it and shoot it, that once fully loaded, yes, it represents a lot of firepower.
Mhm.
But the downside is it has such a long reloading time and it's such a fragile loader.
Yeah.
I would have a nice brace 1860 Armies and that for the backup, because if I pull that, I'm galloping out of here.
Yeah, I think if I was on horseback, which I'm infantry, guys,
Uh-huh.
but if I was on horseback, I would probably rather have a pair of navies or something like
Yeah.
that, or Grizzled and Gunnison.
Yeah, it's a great, fun gun. This model is made by Pieta, and I played one back in the 80s. A good friend of mine had one. And the problem I had with it was the same thing that we see today. The loading lever does not stay attached very well, even though it's got a little clip. And if you look at the video of him shooting, sometimes you'll see he fires and the loading lever actually flicks up and goes back down, you know, for the next shot. So that was always the weakness. And you see a lot of these where that just broke off.
Another real annoyance with this particular
Mhm.
loading lever, these reproductions, they're close, but they didn't quite get it right.
Mhm.
On the original, the first generation Lemat, you know, you got your shotgun rammer.
Mm-hmm.
First generation, it would have been a threaded end, and it would have seated itself down in the bottom of that thing with the threads.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in later production, what they did was they cut a slot
Mm-hmm. Right there.
right there, and then they drilled a hole, cut a slot, crimped it.
Mm-hmm.
That way, it was a friction hold.
Mm-hmm.
Not
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. If I was going to carry, I don't know if I'd even want to carry that in the field as a field gun, because I'm known for carrying cabin ball revolvers in the field, but
Yeah.
it's too easy to lose the parts. To me, this is a great range gun, a great piece of history, and would be a lot of fun in a collection.
Sure, no doubt.
But as far as a practical field gun,
Do I want to go woods walking with a Lemat?
No.
No.
Even though it's a shotgun in there, it just,
Still no.
no. It was a great piece of history, but once you actually sit and load it and shoot it, you can see why the design didn't go too much farther.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Which is unfortunate because I think that it's got a lot of potential,
Mm-hmm.
but
Yeah.
we'll never know.
We'll never know. If they'd have found a way to I honestly think that they didn't have a down here guided rammer like a Colt because he's probably afraid of getting into Colt's patents where the loading doesn't work. Because yes, the barrel screws on like this, but to me, this down here could be made into a guide like in a Colt or something to guide the rammer better.
Maybe, but you got to think if you've got the rammer off and way down here, that's going to add a lot of bulk to it. And by doing what they did, see, the rammer actually used to be on the other side on the first generation.
It does
and then they
have
swapped.
more grace that way. I agree with
So they
that.
kind of try to slim it up a little bit because it's already an absolute man of a gun to tote around.
Yeah. And that's the Calvary model.
Yes.
There are
yes.
3 different models.
Calvary Model has the finger purchase.
He's got a lot of ammunition.
I wish I had that much ammo to burn.
Wow. Well, anyway, thank you very much for coming out and shooting with me today. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Anytime. And in the future, when we're doing some of the technical ones on these, I'll see if Fox come out and play some more, and we'll do some more stuff. So, in conclusion, they're fun guns. They're an interesting piece of history. If you're into Civil War reenactment and you want to play a Confederate officer or a Union officer with a confiscated Confederate gun or something, yeah. Or even a Union sergeant that got one off of a colonel that didn't need it no more or something. This would be a very interesting gun. Now, I know in most of my videos I'll do a full field strip. I'm not going to do that with this one because this gun's not mine. It belongs to a friend of mine. And not being as versed with how this would go together. I've got a book that shows details of how to take it apart. It's just one of the things I don't want to mess somebody else's gun up, you know what I mean, by experimenting and trying to figure out how to take it apart. So I'm not going to do that with this one. But we did take it out and shoot it. It was a lot of fun, and it was accurate. I mean, relatively accurate. Now, in full disclosure, how we loaded it, I loaded one full cylinder using this lever, and I sweated it the whole time, guys. I was sitting there sweating, and this thing was going to break off. It does not inspire confidence. And but the second one we loaded off the gun. I took the cylinder off, put it onto a non-marring object, used a brass loading flask to tap the ball down almost flush, and then put a brass punch up there and seated it on flush. A loading tool would be so much better and allow you to get very consistent. But even with that, you can see the groups were not bad with it. And I feel that it could be a very accurate revolver with a little bit of workup. But that's for another day, and if I ever end up one that's mine and want to invest the time. Now, as I said before, I didn't get to shoot the shotgun because this particular gun, whenever you go to fire it, it wouldn't set off the cap. The fold down hammer face would hit it. It's actually severely beveled, and it's meant that way. It's meant that you push this down, and when it hits that nipple with a cap on it, it should detonate the cap and then fold up and drop down so you can just bang and cock it again and go back to revolver, see. But upon firing it, it was just hitting and skipping and not setting off the cap, and I thought it could have been the cap, but I tried multiple caps and tried 8, 9, 10 hits before it would ever set one off. So I was not going to load that shotgun barrel and sit there and go click, 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 click. The owner of the gun, if he wants us to try to kind of experiment with maybe filing that a little bit, roughing it up a little so it'll grip a little bit more. I think it's a little too polished. So when it hits the cap, it's doing that instead of hitting the cap, it's glancing on the cap. And it's causing the thing to click back up. I tightened up the screw, and it's got a spring there to hold it, but it wants to glance up a little too easy rather than setting off the cap. So, in conclusion, great fun gun. one that you'd probably enjoy in your collection. They're just iconic and very interesting to look at. The famous grape shot revolver. The only weakness I have is that little loading lever right there. That's the only weakness I have with this design. Hopefully you'll get one of these. Get you a loading tool for it to load that cylinder, and you'll post some videos from your shooter. I think it'd be a fun gun to have. Well, that's it, guys. If you've enjoyed the video, please hit the like button before you go. And if you have any questions or comments, please put them in the down below. I'd love to hear from you. Till next time, I'm Blackie, wishing you safe journeys. Have a great day, guys.